Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most dramatic and dangerous political moments in Eastern Europe, the growing tension inside the Belarusian military and the silent pressure building against President Alexander Lukashenko. What happens when an army that has long stood behind a leader begins to question its loyalty? What happens when orders are no longer followed without hesitation? This is the story of fear, control, resistance, and the fragile balance of power inside Belarus. For nearly 3 decades, Lukashenko ruled Belarus with an iron grip. Since 1994, he shaped the country into a centralized system where the presidency dominated the courts, the parliament, the media, and most importantly, the security forces. The military, police, and intelligence services became the backbone of his survival. Loyalty was rewarded. Dissent was punished. Over time, the state and the regime became almost indistinguishable, but no system is immune to pressure. The turning point for many analysts came after the disputed 2020 presidential election. Massive protests erupted across Minsk and other major cities. Citizens flooded the streets, accusing the government of election fraud. The state responded with force. Riot police cracked down on demonstrators. Thousands were detained. Images of violence spread globally. And inside military barracks, soldiers were watching. While the Belarusian army was not directly deployed in large numbers against protesters, the psychological impact was enormous. Soldiers saw their own people demanding change. Many had family members among the protesters. The idea that the army might one day be ordered to suppress its own citizens was no longer theoretical. It became a real possibility. The Belarusian military is not massive compared to global powers, but it plays a strategic role. Positioned between NATO countries and Russia, Belarus has long been considered a buffer state. Its defense structure is heavily integrated with Russia's. Joint exercises, shared air defense systems, and coordinated planning have made the Belarusian army deeply connected to Moscow's military strategy. This connection intensified after Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Russian troops used Belarusian territory as a staging ground. Missiles were launched from Belarusian soil. Suddenly, the country was no longer just a neighbor. It became part of the battlefield infrastructure. This created internal friction. Reports and independent investigations suggested that many Belarusian soldiers were uncomfortable with the idea of being dragged directly into the war. There were whispers of refusal. Some officers allegedly expressed concern about combat readiness and morale. Families feared their sons would be sent to fight in a conflict that many Belarusians did not support. Lukashenko publicly denied any internal unrest. He insisted that the army was united and loyal. State media reinforced this image. Military parades showcased discipline and strength, yet behind the scenes, signs of tension persisted. Recruitment numbers fluctuated. Desertion rumors circulated on social media. Though difficult to verify, these reports painted a picture of uncertainty rather than absolute control. To understand why this matters, we need to examine the structure of power in Belarus. Lukashenko's authority depends on a triangle: the presidency, the security services, and economic patronage. The army is not just a defense institution, it is a political pillar. If cracks appear in that pillar, the entire structure becomes unstable. Historically, revolutions often succeed or fail based on military loyalty. In many authoritarian systems, leaders survive because the army stands with them. The moment that loyalty wavers, even slightly, the calculus changes. Officers begin to evaluate risk. They ask themselves whether following orders ensures stability or leads to chaos. Inside Belarus, younger soldiers grew up in a different information environment than previous generations. Despite strict media control, the internet and encrypted messaging apps exposed them to alternative narratives. They saw how protests unfolded in other countries. They observed how regimes collapsed when security forces refused to fire on civilians. Economic pressure also played a role. Sanctions imposed by Western countries strained Belarus's economy. Inflation rose, opportunities shrank, military salaries, while stable compared to civilian jobs, were not immune to broader economic realities. When economic hardship increases, loyalty based solely on stability becomes fragile. Another layer of tension came from constitutional changes pushed through after 2020. These reforms were presented as modernization, but critics argued they consolidated power. Some military officials reportedly worried about being caught between political factions if instability escalated. Meanwhile, Lukashenko strengthened ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Joint military drills intensified. Nuclear weapons were reportedly stationed in Belarus under Russian control. For some Belarusian officers, this raised concerns about sovereignty. Was the country becoming too dependent? Was the army gradually losing independent command authority? These questions matter deeply in military culture. National armies are built on identity and pride. If soldiers feel they are serving another country's strategic goals rather than their own nation's interests, morale can suffer. There have been moments when Lukashenko appeared unusually defensive in public speeches. He warned of foreign interference. He accused the West of trying to divide the army. He praised officers for loyalty. Leaders often emphasize loyalty most when they fear losing it. Yet it would be misleading to suggest that the Belarusian army openly revolted. There has been no confirmed large-scale mutiny. No tanks in the streets of Minsk turning against the presidential palace. Instead, what analysts describe is quieter hesitation, reluctance, passive resistance. Sometimes revolutions begin not with explosions, but with silence. One significant factor is the role of elite security units. In Belarus, internal security forces and special police units are often considered more loyal to the regime than regular army troops. This creates a dual structure of power. If Lukashenko trusts internal forces more than the army, it may signal concern about broader military reliability. In authoritarian systems, leaders often rotate commanders to prevent independent power bases from forming. Frequent reshuffling can maintain control, but also create instability within command structures. Officers who feel insecure about their positions may focus more on political survival than operational effectiveness. International observers continue to debate whether the Belarusian military would obey an order to directly enter the war in Ukraine. Public opinion inside Belarus has shown limited enthusiasm for involvement. If ordered to fight, would soldiers comply without resistance? Or would refusal become more visible? The concept of an army revolution does not always mean soldiers overthrowing a government. It can mean a gradual shift in attitude, a quiet distancing from political leadership, a refusal to escalate repression. It can mean commanders advising caution rather than aggression. Another important dimension is exile opposition groups. Belarusian opposition figures operating abroad have attempted to communicate with military personnel, urging them not to participate in repression or foreign wars. While the effectiveness of such outreach is unclear, the mere existence of these efforts reflects recognition that the army's stance is crucial. The psychological burden on soldiers cannot be underestimated. Military service is built on discipline and hierarchy. Questioning orders is culturally difficult, yet moral dilemmas arise when orders conflict with personal beliefs. Over time, repeated exposure to controversial political decisions can erode unquestioning obedience. Lukashenko has invested heavily in portraying himself as the guarantor of stability. He frequently references chaos in neighboring regions as a warning of what could happen if his rule ends. This narrative is designed to appeal strongly to the military, which prioritizes order. However, stability based on fear differs from stability based on legitimacy. If officers begin to doubt the long-term sustainability of the regime, they may quietly hedge their positions. They may avoid actions that would permanently tie their fate to a potentially weakening leader. Geopolitics adds further complexity. Belarus's strategic location makes it valuable to Russia and sensitive to NATO. Any instability inside the Belarusian military would attract international attention. External actors might attempt influence, whether through sanctions, diplomacy, or information campaigns. Despite these pressures, Lukashenko remains in power, the state apparatus continues functioning, military exercises continue. Public ceremonies project unity, yet beneath the surface the question lingers: how solid is that unity? History shows that authoritarian regimes can appear stable until the moment they are not. The Soviet Union seemed immovable until it dissolved. Other governments have collapsed quickly once security forces withdrew support, but predicting such turning points is extremely difficult. In Belarus, the army revolution narrative reflects tension rather than open rebellion. It reflects a society where political crisis intersected with military identity. It reflects a leadership aware of potential vulnerability and determined to prevent it. For now, the Belarusian army stands formally aligned with Lukashenko. Orders are followed, structures remain intact, but loyalty in politics is rarely permanent. It is transactional and contextual. Economic stability, national pride, external threats, and internal legitimacy all shape it. If future crises emerge, whether economic collapse, intensified war pressure, or renewed mass protests, the stance of the army could once again become the decisive factor. Will it enforce strict control? Will it act as a mediator, or will it quietly step back? Inside the barracks, conversations likely continue. Officers assess risks, soldiers weigh duty against conscience, leaders monitor signs of dissent. The balance holds, but it is a balance maintained through constant vigilance. The story of the army challenging Lukashenko is not one of dramatic battlefield confrontation. It is a story of pressure building in silence. It is about the invisible line between authority and obedience. It is about how power ultimately depends not just on commands, but on the willingness of others to carry them out. And in Belarus today, that willingness, while still present, is no longer something that can be taken for granted.